Hi, I'm Mark Loux, Extension Weed Scientist at The Ohio State University. I'm standing in some of our research plots at the ORDC Western Ag Research Station. This video is a follow-up to a video we did a couple weeks ago talking about options for control of especially larger Marestail, and it kind of ran through some of the issues with glyphosate 2,4-D when you get on bigger plants, and then what your other options were trying to get two different actives in the Burndown mix that had decent activity on Marestail. So what I'm doing here today is we're just going to walk through. Most of these Burndown treatments have been on a couple weeks, so it's a really good chance to show how some of those strategies worked on larger Marestail. The study I'm in here is an Enlist soybean study, and we have a bunch of different Burndowns, some with 2,4-D, some without, and then different follow-ups. And of course you can use Liberty as a follow-up as well as 2,4-D and glyphosate as a post follow-up on Enlist beans. So this study is designed to show different ways to manage both Marestail and giant ragweed in the Enlist soybean without overusing the 2,4-D that's in the Enlist duo, if you can do that. So what I'm going to do is we're just going to walk through these plots. I'm going to spend just a minute on each one and kind of show how well it worked. And we're basically working of a sequence of sort of less complex and less effective up to more effective. So we have the glyphosate 2,4-D, we got a sharpen treatment, we got some Liberty Burndown, we have some gramoxone Burndown, and then some dicamba to show you. And you know, one of the issues I pointed out in that previous video was, especially as plants get larger, if you didn't do a fall application, the variability we see with just a glyphosate 2,4-D Burndown, right? And if you don't spray that pretty early in spring, if you haven't done a fall Burndown, that's been one of our issues in the state, that you've had to put some metribuzin with it or sharpen or something else. And this plot's just Enlist Duo, which is the mix of glyphosate and 2,4-D, and you can see how big some of the plants were when we sprayed. So it's kind of a tough Marestail situation, and this really illustrates some of the issues we've had with 2,4-D. You know, we give a plot like this a rating of 50 to 60% because it's a little bit hard to tell what's going to happen. And our experience with 2,4-D is you'll need a post-emergence follow-up of some kind that works on Marestail to finish off this plot, because enough of these plants will regrow, right? So that's the glyphosate 2,4-D issue. Some of these are just going to stay there and not do much, but a lot of these will regrow. And so that is one of the issues with glyphosate 2,4-D in general, and also in the Enlist bean, that if you're going to go with an Enlist Duo Burndown and you don't do a fall application, you could have this kind of a situation to start with. So one of the strategies we advocate, especially earlier in the season, to get a little more consistency with the glyphosate 2,4-D Burndown is to put some metribuzin with it, and that can work on smaller plants or if you've done something in the fall. The metribuzin really doesn't help the 2,4-D out enough on larger plants, which is what you see here, right? If you look at this plot and these size of these plants compared to that plot I just showed you with the glyphosate 2,4-D alone, you can see the metribuzin helped out some, and some of these probably won't regrow, but we obviously have some that will. And of course the message is metribuzin helps in a lot of different Burnndowns, but if the plants get too big, you start to lose how much it's really helping. One of the changes we advocate as Marestail get a little bigger especially is to swap in gramoxone for the glyphosate in your Burndown program. You have to have the right other components with it. What we usually advocate there is gramoxone plus 2,4-D plus metribuzin, and the two plots I'm going to show you here illustrate that pretty well. So here's just gramoxone plus 2,4-D, right? And you can see surviving Marestail plants in here around me, so not quite good enough. And then we're going to move to the gramoxone 2,4-D metribuzin. And here's the gramoxone 2,4-D metribuzin plot, which essentially doesn't have a Marestail in it. So, you know, that's a very good philosophy for Marestail. The bottom line is, unless you're very early season, our data is very clear that gramoxone, metribuzin, and 2,4-D is the right combination there. So the other strategy you can take is to get some sharpen in the Burndown program. Also on plants this large, you have to realize that that sharpen metribuzin mix that's good, typically very good on relatively small plants, does start to have some issues on larger plants. The plot's basically under better control than the glyphosate 2,4-D or the glyphosate 2,4-D metribuzin that I showed you. There are some small survivors down in here. If we had sprayed this a couple weeks earlier than we did, like 4 weeks ago, probably wouldn't have any survivors in here at all, but the larger size does start to impact the sharpen. This was actually Zidua Pro plus glyphosate plus metribuzin, Zidua Pro getting a lot of use, and that's one way to get sharpen. The fix here in this program, of course, is to add some dicamba or 2,4-D to that program, and I'll show you that plot here in a minute, but that's the way to basically take this on larger plants if you have the right type of soybean in there, and make sure you get good control. The other change you can make to the Burndown program is to swap in Liberty for the glyphosate and do something like a Liberty, and there are generic versions of Liberty with 2,4-D or Liberty with 2,4-D with metribuzin. We advocate the same thing for Liberty in a burn down situation that we do with gramoxone, and that the right mix is Liberty plus 2,4-D plus metribuzin most of the time. And these two plots show that. This is Liberty 2,4-D, which again, early season on smaller plants might have held. You can see there's some pretty small plants down in here that aren't doing too much. They are surviving. Compared to the glyphosate 2,4-D, it's stronger. Some of these are probably going to regrow. And then this is the Liberty plus 2,4-D plus metribuzin, which, like the gramoxone 2,4-D metribuzin, is essentially clean. There's two issues with the Liberty burn down, and you can see across the weeds we had here, which were bushy wallflowers, some giant ragweed, some chickweed, and Marestail. It did a pretty good job. But the two issues are, one, in a really nasty burn down situation, the Liberty 2,4-D metribuzin can struggle a little bit compared to the gramoxone 2,4-D metribuzin, or like the right use of glyphosate and 2,4-D and dicamba. The other issue is if you're planting Liberty Link beans and you're using glufosinate in your post treatments, you have to be aware of how much you're using through the whole season and whether you can use glufosinate also in the burn down. And then, of course, the last thing is, where does dicamba fit in all of this? Our experience with dicamba versus 2,4-D in a burn down is dicamba is better on Marestail typically than 2,4-D. So in a situation like this was actually N-Vibe plus glyphosate plus dicamba, DuPont's dicamba, the Fexapan. And you can see, compared to the glyphosate 2,4-D, the plants are generally smaller, and our experience is they don't tend to regrow as much. So like a glyphosate 2,4-D on larger plants, we know 30 to 50% of them are going to regrow, and you're less likely to see that with a dicamba. Having said that, on larger plants, we have seen a little bit of antagonism sometimes with anything that contains authority or valor to reduce control somewhat. So it's a little bit difficult to see exactly how this plot's going to end up. Again, these are larger Marestail, so it tends to put some stress on the system. And then this is the dicamba glyphosate with Trivents, which has the metribuzin in it in addition to the other ingredients that are in N-Vibe. And again, early season, we would advocate, that metribuzin will help dicamba the way that it helps with 2,4-D. On larger plants, like the glyphosate 2,4-D, you don't see quite as much help. So these plants, compared to the plot I just showed you, are smaller, maybe a little bit less tendency to regrow, and there are fewer of them. On plants this large, just adding metribuzin is not a cure-all. And again, the dicamba system, we tend to see less regrowth than we do with 2,4-D. Now, the plots that I'm not going to show you that we have out here, you can take an approach like this, the dicamba, glyphosate, metribuzin, and add sharpen to it. We have some plots out here, and like some of the plots I showed you with sharpen over there, if you put sharpen, dicamba, metribuzin together, you wouldn't have any Marestail here at all. So, you can obviously take that approach and use BASF Syngenia plus Zidua Pro plus metribuzin, and that would be a good fit also on larger Marestail. So here's some final reminders. Keep the management aspect in mind. We have a situation this year where we didn't do fall treatment and we didn't get sprayed early. We got some rain, we got out late. We have some plants that are more challenging, and you have to have a more complex burn down. So one of the ways to prevent those situations is to still do a fall application. Doesn't cost a lot of money, sets you up in spring to have whatever burn down you choose generally work better, and also gives us sort of a margin of safety if you get into a nasty weather condition, nasty weather pattern in the spring. You've got the fall herbicides down, you've got mainly spring emerging Marestail that aren't that difficult to control with your burn down, and it sort of buys you some time. So again, it's all about management, not just how good things are on small Marestail.